The last, but certainly not least, part of our 8-part series on word structure is about affixed words. So this is essentially prefixes, suffixes, and infixes. And, there's a way to understand these. We all know prefixes and suffixes. Sometimes people haven't heard of infixes. And so just as a quick way to understand this, if you've ever heard somebody say the F word and they say uneffing believable, that's an infix. So that's a good way to imagine what an infix is about. So a prefix, we understand this. It's, we talked about this earlier, unexpected in the part 1 of this series. Un is a prefix, ed is a suffix. And similar things happen in Chinese. However, it's a little bit more systemized in certain cases. For example, these are all the prefixes in Chinese. All of them. There's no more prefixes than xiao, lao, chu, nan, hao, ke, di. Now, chu, the one at the very top, all that explains is the first few days of Spring Festival. So we don't even need to worry about it. It's not that important. Chu yi is the first day of Spring Festival. Chu er is the second day. Chu san is really easy to understand. So let's go with the others. Let's start with lao. Now, this character means old by itself. But it's important to remember that when something is a prefix, while it may have a tangential connection to its original meaning, it does not have that meaning. What it means is familiarity or seniority. Now, you could say seniority relates to how old you are to some degree, but you could be, 25 and the senior member of a staff working somewhere. It's possible. So, lao just means familiarity and seniority. So, lao wai, the familiar outside person, a foreigner. Now, I will say this about lao wai. That word, while it does, the structure of it is meant to be affectionate and familiar and show respect, it has sort of developed this bit of a feel of being a little bit derogatory. Language evolves. So certain words that previously were fine can turn into something that's a little bit derogatory. It's not that bad. It's kind of like, I don't know if I can think of an analogy, but it's one of those things where most younger people will say, 外国朋友, 外国朋友, a foreign friend, or a 外籍朋友, foreign nationality friend. They will say that a lot, but still the original meaning of lao wai was to be the friendly outsider. How about this one? Lao wang. You'll hear lao wang all the time, or xiao wang, but we'll get to that in a second. But lao wang just basically means like brother Wang. And it's usually, you'll see lao often put with somebody's last name, their xing, not their last name, their surname, because it comes first in Chinese. So it's called a xing. So whoever is called lao wang, their surname is Wang, and that's why they're being called Lao Wang. How about this one? Lao Po. Lao Po. And so in this case, Po is the ancient word for woman. And so you can see here that it's basically saying the familiar woman. Well, that's your wife, right? So the woman who's most familiar to you is going to be your wife, Lao Po. The most spoken way to say it. Most of these prefixes are very spoken in. But what I mean by that is that in Chinese, there's a sort of written language that's very formal, and there's the spoken language that you'll hear day to day. And it's not to say that you can never mix them, but there is a formal set of the language and a more informal. All of these prefixes fall into the more informal category. By the way, you can also say 老公, which means husband. Now let's go to xiao. Very similar to lao. It's a familiarity indicator. Affection expresses affection, but it also expresses youth to some degree. The Chinese conceptualize age, especially in comparisons with small and big, xiao and da. Now again, it's a prefix here where it does not mean literally that zhang is small, but it does express a sort of youthful energy to it. So xiao zhang is like little zhang. And then here's an interesting one. Xiao ji can mean chick, and xiao mao can mean kitten, or they just mean chicken or cat. But it's a chicken or cat that you like. So if you take care of some chickens and you call one of them xiao ji or xiao ji men, right, which would mean several chickens, you're basically saying you like them. Now, it depends on the context. Xiao mao, I have 2 xiao mao. They're both adult cats, cheng mao. But I still call them 小猫 because I feel great affection for my cats, Rick and Morty. So I will still call them 小猫. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the child version of the animal. So just bear that in mind. If somebody says, like, you know, well, this 小狗, meaning dog, 小狗, they're not necessarily saying that it's a puppy. Now, these two, 好 and 难, are very useful. So what they are essentially doing is saying that something is hard to do or something is easy to do. And 好 means good normally, and 难 means hard or difficult normally. But when they're prefixes, just think of them as difficult to do verb or easy to do verb. So 难看 or 好看. Well, 好看 means easy to look at, pretty. 难看, difficult to look at, ugly. So of course, as soon as I learned 难看, I went to all of my male friends and was just like, oh, you guys are all 难看 over here. How about 难吃, 好吃. 吃 means eat, so 好吃, delicious. 难吃, gross, as in gross to eat. So you'll see how these work all the time. How about this one? 可. This is a very useful prefix. It makes what my Chinese teacher You Lao Shi used to say is it 让人觉得 verb. So 让人 means makes people, 觉得 feel. So makes people feel verb. 可怕 pa means to fear, makes people feel fear, aka something that is dreadful, right? Something that is awful or terrible, scary, 可怕, right? Makes people feel fear. 可爱 makes people feel love, lovable. Now, I want to mention about 可爱 is that it's often translated as cute. And that's true. You can totally say about like a baby or a puppy, you can be like, oh, 好可爱. But it's a little bit deeper than the word cute is in English, because the first time I realized this was when I was at a wedding. I play a lot of gigs at weddings with my band, and I remember the MC at the wedding calling the bride 非常可爱. And I thought, he's calling the bride cute? It seems like a strange adjective to choose. But that's because it can sometimes mean more like lovable, lovely, right? Makes people feel love, right? So when you think of the makes people feel plus verb, then that can help you understand this. Now, this last one, 可笑, makes people feel laughter. However, it doesn't mean funny. What it means is ridiculous. So it's kind of got a derision to it in this case. So 可笑 is like, oh, that's ridiculous. People are going to laugh at you over that, right? Whereas 搞笑 or 好笑. In fact, we talked about 难 and 好 in the previous slide. That, if you said 好笑, easy to laugh, that means funny, right? But 可笑 means ridiculous in a derisive type of way. Finally, let's talk about 第. This is really simple. Ordinal numbers. So how do you say first, second, third, fourth, fifth? 第五. Ordinal number plus 5 is fifth. 第一, first. 第20, 20th. Now, I will say this. 第一 can often be used in a noun form to kind of indicate that somebody is your first priority. 他是我的第一. He's my first priority. You know, he's my number one, right? But generally speaking, it's a very simple ordinal number system. Just put 第 before the number, and it just means that number in a ranking of ordinal numbers. So now we've talked about the prefixes. Let's talk about the infixes. Now, infixes are just limited to these two characters, d and bu. Now, they effectively change a verb how construction. So we talked before about verb how words, where the first character is a verb, like 听, and the second character is a result, like 懂. So 听 means listen, 懂 means understand, so 听懂 means I understood, or I understand what I've heard, right? So it's specifically related to hearing. Now, 听得懂 means able to understand, can understand. It's possible through the process of listening, 听, to reach the result of understanding, 懂,听得懂. Now, for many people, when they're first learning Chinese, they need to get a handle on the word 听不懂, because this indicates to the person you're talking to, sorry, there's no amount of listening that I can do that will lead to understanding. I cannot understand. It cannot be achieved. And this is the better way to say it if you're early on and you can't have a conversation yet. Because if you say, 我不明白, for example, that also means I don't understand. But it means I don't understand, like, I don't understand physics, right? It's not that I don't understand because I don't understand the language the physics book is in. So if a physics book is in Spanish, 我看不懂. I don't understand because I don't know the language. It's not possible for that result to be achieved. But I would say, if it were in English, I would still say 我不明白, because I don't get how it all works. It's too hard for me to understand. So you get the difference there is it's that it can't be achieved. How about this one? 走 means to walk or leave, but in this case we'll go with walk. And 动 means move. So 走动 means to walk with the result of movement, and at least the attempt to walk. So 走得动 means that you can walk, right? And then 走不动 means you can't walk. So in the case, imagine you're walking up a mountain and you get really, really tired and you've just run out of energy and you 走不动了. You can't walk anymore. So that's how that makes sense for 的 and 不. So just remember that when you see a verb result like 走动 or 听懂 or 吃下, 吃下 means to eat down, like get it down, eat something down. 吃不下 would mean I can't even eat it down, right? Whenever there's a 不 or a 的 in between the verb and the result, it's saying result can be achieved through the verb or result can't be achieved through the verb. It's really that simple. So that's infixes. What about suffixes? Well, suffixes are more than we can cover. All of them are more than we can cover in one video, because other than the 4 on top, which are kind of special cases, the suffixes they're just loads of them in Chinese, and they're very useful. We'll cover the 4 on the bottom to give you an idea, a little sampling of what many suffixes can be like. But for now, let's go over the 4 on the top, and then just remember that there are many more examples that you'll find in Chinese and in the description below this lesson. So first, let's start with R. So R is the casual maker. Generally speaking, you use R in spoken Chinese, and the only verb that it gets used in is war. So wan is normally the verb here, but that actually sounds very similar. Well, it's the exact same pronunciation as the character for finish. And the character for finish is also sometimes a metaphor for death. Like 他完了 can mean like, oh, he's done for, right? And so they don't like that idea with one for play, so they end up saying war. And besides, playing or having fun is about the most casual thing you can do. But this is the only verb you're going to see that has any kind of frequency with the R, the change to the R. And also, I'm sure this is pretty clear from the first word, R doesn't really, when it's a suffix like this, it doesn't have its own syllable. It combines with the previous syllable and sort of changes how it sounds. So na changes to nar. And in this case, it actually changes the definition. Now, usually, if you say hua, for example, to mean flower, you could change that to huar, and all it's doing is just being casual and chill, right? But with na, that means that normally. Nar means there. Zhe by itself means this. Jar means here. So it's, in this case, it's not really making it casual, it's changing the definition, but generally speaking, when you see the R added, it's just a casual marker, and you combine it with the previous pronunciation. The exception to this is when it is not a suffix. When R, for example, the word arzi, which means son, S-O-N, like as a son and daughter. So in that case, it's R, or 女儿, which means daughter, right? And so in these cases, what we're talking about here is when R means child. And that's not a suffix, right? So when it means child, it's pronounced R, second tone, and it has its own syllable. It does not combine with the others. But as long as it's a suffix, it sure does. Now, next, let's talk about z. Once again, if it's by itself, z would be pronounced third tone, z, and it's not a suffix. It's its own word meaning son, S-O-N. But when it is a fifth tone, it's a suffix creating nouns. Now, the character xie means shoe. 鞋子 is the general word for shoes. Now, you might be saying, well, wait a second, why wouldn't you just say 鞋? And it's because the same reason we talked about in part 1. Some characters are morphemes but not words, so they can't be used alone. 鞋 is one of those. You need to combine it with at least one other character before it can constitute a word. So 鞋子 is the general word for shoes in Chinese. And if you wanted to add some other detail, then you could drop the z and put the detail, like 皮鞋. 皮鞋 is leather shoes, like nice shoes, dress shoes. 拖鞋 is slippers. So you get the idea that it doesn't have to be 鞋子. 鞋子 is for the general word for shoes. As soon as you get more specific, you can drop the z. 骗, this is a more classic example of a noun creator because 骗 by itself means to cheat. It's a verb. 你骗了我, you cheated me, you lied to me, right? A 骗子 is one who cheats or a cheater. So that's a good example there. A dai is a bag. A daizi is the general word for bag. And by the way, it's like usually bags that have some kind of opening in it, like a plastic bag. But if you were to say a plastic bag, that would be 塑料袋. 塑料袋. And that is, you don't say 塑料袋子, no, because you're already making it specific. By saying 塑料袋, then you do not need the z. Generally, when it's creating nouns in this way, it's talking about the general term for them. You know, 勺子 is the word for spoon, but as soon as you want to say 汤勺, a soup spoon, that's more specific, you drop the z. So this happens all the time with the z, and it also can happen with to. So by itself, this character is usually pronounced to, and it means head. When it's a suffix, it does not mean head. So good example here, 舌头, 舌头. This means tongue. It's just the word for tongue. As soon as you add something more specific, you say 舌尖, meaning the tip of your tongue. You drop the toe. 骨头. Bone plus toe means bone in general. But again, as soon as you want to say that it's your 胯骨, your hip bone, then you drop the toe. 尽头. I like this one because 尽 means to use up, to finish up. You have a toothpaste bottle and you've gotten all of it out. 尽头 is a noun because it's got to now. It means the end. And a 开头 is the beginning. So, for example, Mandarin Blueprint, we had a 开头back in 2016 when we started our company. And we haven't yet reached the 尽头, hopefully. So these are examples of creating more nouns. Now, sometimes people will ask, what's the difference between to and zi? No difference in meaning. And also, there's no real rhyme or reason to when to gets used versus when zi gets used. So it's just something you'll have to get used to. But zi is a little bit more common, and you'll see this all the time. Many of you are already familiar with this one, men, which is just the plural for humans. It is possible to have certain things that are not humans, like, some animals or whatever, but generally you don't use men for inanimate objects. But if you're going to say a human, 朋友 is a friend, 朋友们, that's friends. 我 is me or I, 我们 is we or us. 孩子 is a child, 孩子们 is children. So a good thing to recognize is this. The word for hello in Chinese is 你好. If you're talking to one person. If you're talking to 3 people, if you walk into a room and there are 3 people there, you don't say 你好because there are 3 of them. You say 你们好. 你们好. And that's how you can remember that this men is very important for pluralizing humans. Okay, so those are the 4 that are kind of somewhat essential to the language. These next 4 are just examples to show you just how interesting these suffixes can be. But like I said, this is by no means an exhaustive list of the suffixes in Chinese. So let's talk about 家. So 家 by itself means home. But when it's a suffix, it means an expert in the field. And so you could say that this person is at home doing whatever it is that they're doing because they're an expert. A 作家 is to write plus expert. It's a writer. But let me be clear here. We're not just talking about somebody who is like a casual writer or even somebody who's written a book. We're talking about like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or something where it's like you're at the top of your field, right? And it's often, in my experience, it's more based on results, less based on like actual quality. So somebody might grumble and go, "Oh, Stephen King is not as good of a writer as whoever," but he's undeniably one of the most successful financially. He's been in terms of sales. So he would certainly be called a 作家, 艺术家. Well, art expert, an artist, right? Again, a good artist. Van Gogh, Picasso, right? We're not talking about just somebody who paints. You could say 艺术者. 者 is a word that you use for a person who does that thing, and it's a little bit less highfalutin. 科学家, science expert, a scientist. Now, 科学家 is, I find, to be a little bit less rigorous in who gets called a 科学家. Usually, if you just have a job that involves the scientific method, people are willing to call you a 科学家. But, yeah, that's just an example there. Here's another one I like a lot. 性. So 性 means nature. It refers to gender as well, which is somebody's nature to some degree. And so we're talking about the ness of something, the ism of something, the 真实性, the validity of truth, right? So it's like it turns concepts into nouns. 可能 means possible. 可能性 is the possibility. 耐 means patient. 耐性 is patience, as in the concept of patience. Like you should apply some patience to this. Now, the being patient is 耐心. That is to say, a heart, a patient heart. That's being patient. 耐性 is like the concept of patience. And so whenever you see 性, you're getting at the essence of what something is. And what's so nice about Chinese is that it's way less complicated than English. You have something ity, something ness, something ism, something ship, something ence, versus just 性 in Chinese. So you'll get the hang of that as you move forward. 化. Well, this character means change. So it's like, something if I, something eyes. But again, simpler than English. 进化. Advance plus eyes, to evolve, right? So 进化 or 进化 is evolve. 进化论 is the theory of evolution. 简单, simple. 简单化, simplify. 绿, green. 绿化, greenify, or a forest. So basically, like the green movement is in a process of 绿化. I like this one, 学, because in English you have so many different words for fields of study, but in Chinese you just add 学 after the subject. 社会, society. 社会学, sociology. 经济, economy. 经济学, economics. 动物, animal. 动物学, zoology. So all of those have these different ways of expressing them, and in Chinese you just add 学 afterwards, so it's quite easy. Now, like I said, there are way more suffixes than just that, so that'll conclude our discussion of suffixes for now, but remember, look in the description for more examples. And that'll conclude our discussion of affixes, and also our discussion of the 7 different types of compound words, word structure, and this 8-part series. So if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below the video. And of course, you can contact us, and we'll talk about it on the podcast at mandarinblueprint.com.